line, has moved on to the Microsoft world and willing to come back and periodically give us updates on what he's seeing with the data analytics roadmap, as well as what experiences he's had lately. So our team is always delighted to see Chris and learn from him. And so we'll let you take it away, Chris, and share with us the topics that you have for today.
Well, I mean, I know there were some questions. In fact, I have some things that in my email here that came from Corey and from I think Scott Hippus as well. So if before we just jump into kind of monologuing and things like that, I'd be happy to kind of entertain any questions that are top of mind, especially if anybody has to leave soon. And you're right, I have no idea how long this will take, but no one has ever yet gotten mad at me for getting out early. So,
Excellent. So, does anybody have any questions offhand that they'd like to ask Chris before he hops into the slide deck?
Yeah. Hey, Chris, how you doing? This is Corey.
Hey, Corey. Nice to hear your voice. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. Good to see you. I'm struggling to find my questions in Teams here at the moment, but I did have some.
I have them.
You do?
I have them right here. These are this is kind of what I saw was, around where Synapse fits in data storage and Polybase and, things about Power BI reading. And maybe that's best if these questions are kind of more Synapse oriented for me to jump into Synapse and kind of show what that environment's like.
Yeah, I think that was kind of like one half of them. And then I guess the other half, is kind of just around, what you're seeing in some of these implementations or recommending when it comes to, what we consider kind of our traditional architecture when we don't have a data lake. And then, what you're seeing is changes when people do have a data lake. Like, for instance, I'm hearing some clients that, large clients that are putting even their transactional data from like their large ERP systems into the data lake, and then sourcing everything then from their data warehouse and BI environments down. And that to me just seems like a lot of data movement on a daily or nightly basis, and a lot of latency. And so I'm not sure I understand some of those approaches and the advantages. And so some of that, and then I guess this might roll into Synapse then as well, when if they're doing that. We talked a couple of years ago on how Power BI can ingest from the data lake or can ingest from SQL Server, and the pros and cons. And I don't think back a few years ago the performance was so great from Power BI or analysis services from a data lake. And just kind of curious how that whole landscape might have changed, or what you're really seeing and recommending kind of on that high level architecture view, and then rolling into the Synapse side too.
Sure. Okay. Well, I will try to address it as we start talking about Synapse. Any other questions that come to mind before I maybe start to address Corey's questions? If we get done early, Chris, I'm going to ask you to do a magic trick, but so you might get ready with one, or maybe pan your camera into your ceiling of your house so we can see all the cards in the ceiling.
I'll just send you a video to Penn and Teller.
Okay, so let me do a little bit of setting the table again. This is some of the material that we did cover the other night, but what I wanted to cover is around Azure Synapse Analytics and its ability to address enterprise data workloads as well as big data analytics. Is really kind of the theme of this talk, and it's been really interesting. I tell you, I'm just kind of getting my monitor set up here so I can kind of present right. But with for those that haven't met me, Chris Fleming, I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. I work in an organization called the Customer Success Organization, and I'm actually now part of U.S. enterprise manufacturing. So what that means is, first of all, cloud solution architect is a fairly generic term. There's different flavors of cloud solution architects. Some of us have a data and AI focus. Some of us have an apps and infrastructure focus, and yeah, that's my main area of expertise is around the data platform, data and AI. Really, because of all of my years at Skyline, I've had a lot of application building in my background, so I can still hold my own, writing code and things like that. But I try to leverage in my other teammates in the customer success organization wherever possible. The customer success org is an org that is aligned with customers that have made an investment in Azure, and they're trying to begin using it. So our charter is really to help a customer figure out how to get from their current state to where they are looking to go. We're not really we're not involved with actively doing projects per se. We will do some POCs and things like that, but it's all of the things that we do is around just kind of modeling the way and showing them the value of Azure and helping them understand how they can begin to take advantage of it. I am in a team that is closely aligned with two Wisconsin customers and 2 Minnesota customers. So I work very closely with Johnson Controls, Rockwell Automation, Ecolab, and Cargill. But for the most part, it's Johnson Controls is where I'm focused. So, yep, and then the manufacturing is a new thing. Manufacturing is a new thing for me in that we have kind of specialized our field teams around different industry verticals. There's teams that focus on healthcare, education, government, manufacturing, retail. Trying to think if I've missed anything, finance. So, yeah, so let's just jump into Azure and Synapse Analytics, and we'll begin by looking at the traditional modern data warehouse. If we think of the data warehouse, I think everybody on this call acutely understands what a data warehouse is. It's the ability to build probably a dimensional data warehouse that has facts and measures and dimension tables that can be easily pulled into something like Power BI or reporting services or Excel pivot tables or other tools. Those data warehouses are typically built with an ETL tool. That could be SQL Server Integration Services. It could be Azure Data Factory out in Azure. And really about the only other ones that I've seen are things like Talend, third-party solutions. A few years back, the data warehouse term was kind of enriched with the word modern. And that was primarily meant to talk about the non-traditional type of data that we would find in an enterprise data warehouse. So things that are like IoT data, social media data, things that are not highly, maybe don't really have a strong schema to them. How can we create an environment that brings in all of the data that the organization has and make it bring value to it? In order to do that, some of the environments on premise really began environments that were traditionally solely on premise began to fail because the compute that was needed to do these activities was tightly coupled to the storage. And in some cases, I've heard stories from customers that have operated this kind of an environment on premise, and they got to the point where they're constantly just acquiring compute for storage and applying patches and maintaining and racking, and adjusting, and managing that environment. They really weren't getting the value out of running it. So along comes the cloud, and the cloud gives us the ability to separate the compute from the storage. So I realize everybody here understands that. So the modern data warehouse involves being able to bring in all data and land it into kind of a long-term storage, and then as we see value in that data, be able to bring it into the warehouse. Corey, one of the things that I'm seeing is, I recognize my field of vision is fairly narrow to a few, very large enterprise customers. But one of the things that I am seeing is that these customers have lots and lots of ERP systems, and in some cases they want to retire those systems, and that those systems have lots of data in them. And it's not necessarily real practical to migrate all that data out of, let's just say, out of Oracle to SAP, or SAP to Oracle, or Dynamics to Oracle, or whatever the scenario is. So there are some strategies where they want to just really unload all the data out of those ERPs and park it into some type of convenient storage, and then bring that data into a data warehouse. In other cases, in these large enterprise customers that have so many ERP systems, it is just becoming impractical to build so many reports that go directly against those end systems, especially when they have problems like compliance laws. They have, maybe I'm searching for the term. JCI, as an example, I think, and Rockwell probably as well, has things that they do for defense customers, and so they have regulations that require them to ensure that certain data is only viewed by a U.S. employee, and so it's those kinds of huge challenges that really make the modern data warehouse, especially something like Databricks, very well versed to deal with the large amount of data that is coming into this warehouse environment, to be able to collect it and to put it away, if you will, into a curated zone quickly. Databricks has been real popular in the modern data warehouse environment for customers that have. The other night I was describing, what is big data, and we've all heard the terms, what is big data, but big data. There's an individual by the name of Buck Woody at Microsoft, very interesting speaker to listen to. And if you listen to Buck talk, he'll talk about big data from the standpoint of if you can't if you can't put the data into a format that's useful to you in the time that you have allotted, you've got a big data problem. So it doesn't have to be, these huge environments that have, significant amounts of data to necessarily want to warrant something like a Databricks. So let me pause there. Everybody understands this, right? This environment. I want to talk a little bit about Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now, quite honestly, just so you're not confused, we no longer refer to Azure SQL Data Warehouse as Azure SQL Data Warehouse. We now refer to it as Synapse. Back in, I want to say, November of last year, at a conference, we announced Synapse, Azure Synapse Analytics, and Azure Synapse Analytics at the time of the announcement went into GA at that time. It went into GA because Data Warehouse was rebranded, and it was already GA. But there were pieces not described on this slide that also make up Synapse Analytics that are still today either in private preview or in public preview. So just be aware of that. We did a name change on Synapse and on SQL Data Warehouse, and we now refer to that as Synapse Analytics. So SQL Data Warehouse is comprised of it's a massively parallel environment, and it's comprised of at a very high level. You have you can, when you scale up or scale down your data warehouse, you are either adding or subtracting compute nodes. Those compute nodes are able to query off of different distributions of data. So I think there's typically 60 distributions of data, and what I'm really describing here is if I had a table with this is probably too simple of an example, but table with 60 records in it, and I did what's called a round robin distribution. You'd see one record in each one of these cylinders. And then what happens is when I query, if I do a select star off of that table as an example, that query comes in through the control node, and then it asks each of the compute nodes to participate in bringing back, querying that data across all of these distributions and bringing that data back up. So this is fundamentally how this works. Scaled out compute off of remote storage, and maybe a little bit further up beyond this simple example I gave of a select star. If you had a command that is something like a join, what you would see is something that this compute node might need data off of this compute node, and you wind up kind of getting data moving back and forth between these compute nodes to satisfy a query. Nicole, I see you got a question. So, and feel free to just shout her out if you guys have got questions. So.
I do. I got started in data warehousing on IBM parallel data warehouse platform, very similar with a control node, the compute and the storage. And when the data was distributed, it was distributed with a partitioning key. And then any other related data could also be distributed on those same nodes with that partitioning key. So if you had a join, it would join within that compute node, and there was optimization to that. Is it similar to that, or how does it distribute?
No, it's I would have to say it's pretty much identical to that. This is where a good data model is really worth their weight in gold with implementing something like a SQL data warehouse. The SQL data warehouse, when you are designing a table, so let's say you have a table called the employee table, you have to, when you in the create definition, the DDL to create that employee table, you have to also specify what the distribution is going to be. So the distribution, I think by default is a round robin. So if I insert 60 records, it just round robin, just the next one goes to the next cylinder. There is a hash key, so you can do a hash key, and I think we've got an improvement where we can actually do multiple keys together, but you can create a hash key so that records of the same hash kind of fall to the same distribution, and that really significantly helps performance. And then we have something called a replicate distribution as well. So replicate distribution would be for very small tables. So if you had as an example, probably something like a date table wouldn't be a bad replicated table. And so instead of that table being distributed across all the nodes or hashed across all the storage, it would actually be replicated across them all. And that is to deal with, reduce the need to move data between these nodes. Again, when I'm talking, for anybody that's still a little bit fuzzy in this topic, what that means is when this computer here is trying to do a query, especially a query that's a join, if the data that it needs is actually over here, in order for it to return its results up here, those results have to go from here to here, then to here. So it's called a data movement service, and the less we can use that, the faster the queries are. So anyway, yeah, I just kind of felt it was important to kind of talk a little bit about how data warehouse was put together. Again, we have this concept of a control node, a compute node, the distribution that Nicole was actually just talking about. And then there are different caches. Just be aware that there are things like clustered column indexes and different caches that will really help us get the most performance out of that environment as possible. Now, that was the modern data warehouse architecture, the big data analytics architecture. This slide is trying to represent what a typical big data analytics architecture is. A typical big data architecture where maybe I'm ingesting at high rates IoT data off of machines in our manufacturing plant. That typically you're using a stream processing capability, and that is a capability that Azure HD Insight possesses a real strong capability. Also, Azure Databricks supports a real strong capability to do this. So this, I should have put the word "or" here. I don't know that I don't know that I've ever really seen both in a particular architecture, but a lot of times this is not uncommon to see a Databricks environment or a HD Insight environment. For those that are maybe not familiar with either, the kind of sort of the decoder ring on this is there's a language called Spark that is very, very powerful, very, very popular. And Spark is an Apache project. It's an open source language, and Azure HD Insight is Microsoft's Hadoop offering out in the cloud. So quite a few years back, Microsoft partnered with Hortonworks to make a PaaS offering of Hortonworks, what was known as HDP, Hortonworks Data Platform, and make a platform as a service version of that that's called Azure HD Insight. When you go out to Azure and ask for an Azure HD Insight environment, you will be further asked what kind, do you want it to be a Spark environment? Do you want it to be an HBase, a database environment? What is it that you're looking for? And you can spin that up. Some of the folks that were real instrumental in building this Spark language for the open source Apache language, and I'm probably super oversimplifying this, but some of the folks that were involved in building Spark decided, you know what, we should build our own company called Databricks. And all the things that we do with Spark, we will save our secret sauce and go above and beyond what we did with Apache and bring some special capabilities to the Spark language in our commercial offering of Spark, which is Azure Databricks. So Databricks is an independent company. Azure has partnered, Microsoft Azure, we've partnered with Databricks to bring their offering to Azure as well as a PaaS solution. So we think of these as first party Azure services. We think of them in the same way that we think of SQL Server is what I'm trying to say. It's part of the family. It's part of what we offer. There's other things such as sometimes customers will have commitments where they'll make monetary commitments to Microsoft to acquire some Azure compute time and kind of a subtle point, but the Databricks and things like that are all part of that, are all included in that arrangement that they make with Microsoft. So anyway, this is a typical big data architecture, and what many companies are forced with is having these two critical yet independent systems. I have a big data environment, and this is what we do all of our data science work in. I have an enterprise data warehouse, and then this is where, this could be SQL servers and SSIS servers and SSRS and things like that, and that's where they do that work. Azure Synapse Analytics now is going to bring all of these two things together. It gives us the ability in one single environment to do the kind of work that we would do with big data, the kind of work that we would do with relational data. And sort of our mission for accomplishing this is Azure Synapse. We wanted to offer a limitless service that allows you to do EDW and big data work. We've built a unified experience that allows you to do the ingestion work, your preparation, your management work, et cetera. So what that winds up looking like, if you remember the previous two slides where I had all these icons and boxes and squares and things like that for different pieces, well, this is what this looks like now, where it's just really vastly simplified. And if for those on the call here that have been involved with managing environments or even developing in these environments, you know that you're kind of maybe have multiple windows open in your browser. You have different people that are involved with setting up the security and the permissioning and sharing files, but different skills and things like that. So we really want to make it much easier for organizations to get the useful output from either EDW or big data workloads, and we think Synapse Analytics is going to do that. The focus areas we've had, of course, we're always focused on performance, always focused on security, but we wanted our developers to be productive. We want you to have the ability to work with all data across all things, and we know these things can be expensive, and so we want to make sure that we have the ability to kind of prioritize workloads as well, so that we can give reserve performance and ensure that the things that are important to an organization, they have the performance that they need. So what works well for Synapse, what doesn't? Well, Synapse it's designed for analytics, large volumes of data, consolidating lots of data into a single spot. Being able to shape, model, transform, aggregate data. Batch oriented, being able to query across large data sets, and all using things like SQL. So I think you probably knew that, and you probably know this as well. The things that what would you not approach for Synapse? The transactional things, OLTP, high frequency read writes, high volumes of singleton inserts and things like that. Row by row processing. Probably not the best fit for Synapse, and we would direct you over to something like, Azure SQL Server, Managed Instance, Hyperscale, one of those environments. Okay, so the other night on the call, I got kind of tangled up on how this all comes together, but again, I mentioned that today, so some terminology at Microsoft, GA stands for generally available. When things are introduced into Azure, they're big things, they're big products, they're normally go into a private preview, and we will try to get customers that are a good fit enrolled into a private preview program, so that they can help us get the service ready for public preview, and then from public preview it'll go to GA. And so this was announced, Synapse Analytics was announced last November. It went into GA, but what really went into GA was that SQL data warehouse. That was GA. Everything else at the time was in private preview. What was in private preview? Private preview was the things like our Apache Spark Studio and data integration. So please know that we've got some things that we offer today, and we have some things that are coming. Things I think are moving along pretty well, and I'm really expecting this to move into these two pieces to kind of move into GA relatively soon. I don't speak for the product team, and I know for a fact that they won't release until they're ready, but most of the things that I've worked with in Synapse have been pretty solid. And then into the far future, we have this Gen 3. We like any other Azure solution or any other company that has a successful product, they'll continue to evolve it. All right, so I'm going to build out this slide. Yeah.
On the previous slide, if you could go back, I missed this the other night and I caught it when I was recapping it. Can you describe the code-free data flows in the V2?
Well, yeah, that's really talking about the data wrangling, all the features that you have in Data Factory. So I want to say that would be the data wrangling parts where you expose into Power Query, the Power BI interface for being able to kind of work with and transform data. I think that's really addressing that part of it.
Okay, the code free it was what caught my eye.
Well, okay, so the code, so that we would think of Data Factory as kind of a code-free environment. It's not like you're opening up a notebook or Visual Studio and having to write pound out C# code or something like that to build a pipeline. So it really is more of a drag and drop and configure than it is more of a coding experience, right?
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. I'm going to build it out. I hate the building slides. I typically tend to remove all the builds. See if I get this built out. I did. So this is another view of Azure Synapse Analytics. And sometimes what I really mean about Azure Synapse Analytics is this Azure Synapse Studio. So let me get my highlighter set up here. But Azure Synapse Studio is a new developer experience. It's a software as a service where you'll be able to go out to the Azure portal and launch the Synapse Studio. And in Synapse Studio, you're going to be able to you'll be able to create a workspace. And in that workspace, you'll be able to, you'll be able to manage the workspace, you'll be able to secure it, you'll be able to monitor in terms of what things are running, what jobs and things like that are running. And of course, there's a Metastore that's part of it. But the things that you're able to do in the workspace is, I'm going to start with the analytic runtimes here, SQL and Spark. So we are giving, Synapse Analytics provides a SQL server, so that's Azure SQL Data Warehouse. And then we also are offering Spark compute. So in a single environment, you are able to execute SQL like you're used to, or if you're typically like wanting to do big data processing and wanting to use Python, Scala, R, .NET, and things like that, you could do that all using Spark. These two analytic runtimes, it's never been merged together like this before, where you've had these two environments. But what's also exciting is that these two runtimes come in two different form factors. They come in either a provisioned or an on-demand form factor. What does that really mean? The provision means it's typically what you've seen in Azure, where you go out and spin up a SQL a database, and you're provisioning that database. It's also another way of saying that you're paying you're going to be paying Microsoft for that SQL database, and at a high level, what you're paying for is the compute and the storage that is being used by that database. And so with SQL, I can provision, I'm able to provision a SQL data warehouse inside Synapse Studio, or I have what's called this on-demand, the serverless, SQL Server serverless. I have this on-demand capacity. So the on-demand capacity is really exciting. It's interesting from the perspective of I will show you how we will have data that is sitting out in our Azure Data Lake storage. So in this example, where in an example where an organization is loading lots of data into a data lake, more data than maybe is necessarily transformed into an enterprise data model. You have a data analyst or a data engineer or even a data scientist wanting to kind of casually examine the data that's sitting in the data lake storage. They need compute to be able to open that file and read it and filter it and things like that. So they of course could do that through Polybase and our provisioned capacity, or they could just execute our on-demand capacity. So the on-demand capacity means, it just simply means when a query is running, there will be a cost for that, and then when the query is completed, the cost is completed as well. So this on-demand is especially interesting from the standpoint of again, doing the data discovery, data analyst work, data science work, to be able to to work with a low-cost, comparatively low-cost SQL environment that doesn't interfere with things that are provisioned and being used elsewhere for other workloads. Spark today, the Spark compute is provisioned today, and I do believe that it is going to be, this is a part that I'm still not quite certain on. The Spark compute has a time to live, similar to how Databricks works. And so basically what I'm saying is Spark will be aware that if you're doing queries against it, it'll be aware of that. And then if it suddenly everybody goes home for the day, and there's no activity hitting that Spark cluster, it will wind down at the time after the point in time that you've specified. If there's no workload hitting it, it will just expire and retire. But I do believe that that's also both form factors will truly be an on-demand. You have the different languages that are of interest to your organization, from SQL to R. And then we have access to the data we are integrating. I'm just going to click into this next slide here with our connected services. So that from a data integration standpoint, Synapse is connected into obviously data lake storage, data share, Azure machine learning, other parts of the Azure ecosystem can be integrated into Synapse Studio. Any questions about this at this point? So the one last thing I want to state while I'm here is, and I didn't so much emphasize this the other night, but this common data model to me is tremendously exciting. I'm not sure if Skyline has had a chance to get involved with a common data model project before, but a few months back, and I'm just going to stop this and see if I can get into my. I've got a presentation that I wanted to share. Sure enough, I must have closed it out.
Hey, Chris, this is Scott Hippis. Do you want the tough questions?
Yeah, fire them away.
Yeah. Sorry I was late, and welcome. I really appreciate you doing this for us again. So, we recently have been having some discussion around the common data model, and part of it is that we're seeing more and more technology that can kind of sit on top of the data lake, which maybe might lend itself to the common data model being more meaningful, meaning whether it's Databricks or Synapse being able to directly work with that, or Power BI data flows. They can all now directly read from the data lake, which makes that more of kind of a first-class data citizen. But at the same time, we've always distinguished between kind of data lake storage and actual database. And it's, you're doing that schema on read, it's not as performant. So when you start, when I hear things like Dynamics 365 is really using common data model behind the scenes, and, if you were to truly make it more of a first-class citizen, are you starting to give up performance, or what's the right balance there? What's the intended use of a common data model?
So if you start looking at all of our different services and started kind of looking at are they CDM aware, you're going to start seeing more and more. The answer is yes. It's yes. It's yes. So like IoT Hub, Azure Data Factory, Power BI is now common data model aware. Synapse Data Warehouse is common data model aware. Azure Data Lake. Azure Data Lake Store, of course, can store that the common data model. Fundamentally, what I think the vision is the ability for orgs to ultimately be able to create new opportunities to build things like predictive and maybe prescriptive data model, machine learning capabilities, and make them more widely available to companies that perhaps weren't able to take advantage of them. So with, as you know, an elegant data model makes everything possible, right? And something that's not elegant, makes everything so much harder. And if an organization has the ability to kind of very quickly, much more easily kind of map their data into an elegant data model, they can start getting value out of that data much more rapidly. The more and more that companies are able to norm to a common model, or kind of a common constructs, I think it becomes much more feasible to create, it could be something like a predictive pricing model, or, customers today are looking at, wanting to kind of deploy, customer churn models to say, am I going to have some attrition in my customer base, or what's the likelihood of a customer accepting my proposal, or it could be really kind of any kind of scenario from, financial services to, healthcare. And that to me is kind of the piece that is, I think, the most intriguing about having this common data model is the ability to light up these, for companies to be able to actually leverage new things that might have been outside of their reach typically. In the manufacturing space, we're particularly excited about that because not all manufacturing companies are the most savvy, or have access to deep technical experts that can build some of these advanced analytic capabilities against their data. So Scott, I don't know if I'm dealing with the question adequately or not, but you also have the ability now to start doing like auto-generating data models, enterprise data warehouses and things like that off of common constructs.
Yeah, and I guess I was somewhat on board with that vision. I guess for that to come to fruition, a lot of independent vendors would kind of have to start building solutions around it. Or I guess to be fair, as you mentioned, more and more Microsoft solutions are supporting it. In my own experience, if I want to do something like a data flow and I thought of landing it, in Power BI data flows, you have the opportunity to pick a common data model. More times than not, I do a custom entity because I look at how detailed and complex. I know they're simple as far as taking a complex industry and representing it in an elegant way. But if you have, say, 5 fields, like Skyline's CRM or something, and I want to take an opportunity, frankly, I found it kind of complicated to figure out, well, what do I map it to? And so I'm just curious, have you seen a number of clients actually taking the step to conform their models to the common data model?
No, in my field of vision, again, it's just I'm working with this a very I'm pretty intimate with this a few customers, Scott. So I know that there are some visionaries in the company that are like, wow, we should take a look at a hard look at this common data model and try to conform to it. But I think the bigger the organization that you have, it sometimes becomes a real challenge to kind of get everyone to get on board. But what I'm trying to share with you right now is more of a future-looking thing. We have by the way, is anybody attending Ignite? In I think it's in 2 weeks. Do you have a link to Ignite?
I think often we have more attendance there on our custom dev. Just traditionally, I don't. We've always been more of the pass. We started having discussions about. There's more and more Azure and data relevant stuff every year, so that might change. But historically, it's been more of, say, a Greg Levenhagen and Tim Miller kind of.
Sure.
Attendance.
Okay, so I'm pretty certain there's no cost to this year because of the COVID circumstances. But go out to Ignite, take a look at at registering. It's over 3 days. But on the session catalog, there will be some things, honestly, that are broadcast live, and other things that are going to be kind of recorded sessions. So take a look at the catalog to see if there's something of interest to you. But this is the piece I'm kind of trying to draw your attention to is Microsoft acquired ADRM, a leader in large-scale industry-specific data models. And this happened, in June. I had the opportunity to bring, when I was at Skyline, we were working with, we had an opportunity to bring ADRM into the Pewaukee office and take a look at one of their healthcare data models that we were interested in buying for a project. Didn't pan out, but man, I'll tell you, it was impressive. The data model, Kevin Schofield walked in the office, and as I recall, the Pewaukee conference table was huge, right? and he had this roll of paper under his arm, kind of rolled it out on the desk, and it was a thing of beauty. This healthcare data model was incredible. So now we have ADRM. Let's see if there's any other links, about the different industry models that they have. As you can see, they have what these guys sold as data models, schemas, right? They're now folded into Microsoft, and we're going to do something with them, right? Where this is going to come into is this is going to really greatly enrich the common data model, Scott. You will find, I think that's been my personal experience too, looking at the CDM is, okay, how do I get started? Where do I get started? Do I have the right fit or not? But the sophistication of these data models is going to get significantly amplified, and I'm sort of anticipating that there's going to be sessions out at Ignite that kind of talk more about how this is going to be available. But we will have a solution, kind of a data modeling solution that you'll be able to get into in Azure, around Synapse, around the data lake store, to be able to either define your own data models, could be able to kind of utilize one that exists, maybe take aspects out of some of the models that exist, and then also kind of roll your own. So I think that's a piece that I'm personally really excited about, with kind of this vision of being able to greatly help companies more quickly take advantage of the data that they have, and then more quickly be able to get to things such as the predictive analytics, such as is my customer going to accept my proposal, to even maybe more predictive things where if the system, as you will, is observing certain things happening in the business, it can automatically take action on things that it's seen.
Hey, Chris, this is Matt, and again, thanks for doing this. I was doing some digging the other day, and I couldn't really put my finger on exactly where the common data model lives. Is it running on Azure Data Lake Store technology? Is it running on SQL technology in the background?
Yeah. So. I'll see if I can find you some details that kind of help clarify that, because it couldn't be more confusing. You're right, Matt, about there's CDM, there's CDS, right? There's common data service and there's common data model. And what do I need dynamics? Do I not need dynamics? Where does this fit? And what I'm describing is something that would be purely Azure, purely data lake, purely within Synapse.
And I have been confused on that, Chris, because originally it seemed like there were two different common data models, right? Like you could go into Dynamics and provision entities there. And Dynamics 365 talked about how it would leverage a common data model, but that wasn't actually, was it actually in Azure Data Lake Storage?
Oh, it is now. Yeah, you can create CDM folders, and you can write your own data into your own CDM format in Data Lake Store. Yes, you can do that now.
Okay, I've done it in Power BI. I wasn't sure if the Power Apps in Dynamics 365, if that now, if there was an other CDM, or if that's all, if you could bring so for Dynamics 365, could you bring your own data lake and actually have the CDM data there for all of your Dynamics entities?
I think so, yeah. It's been a while since I've worked in the Dynamics 365 space, but I believe there was some type of, I forget the name of the term, like a data export service or some type of service that was charged with kind of populating that common data model.
Okay, yeah.
So anyway, okay, so
Chris, I have a question.
Sure.
Real quick. This piggybacks on my question about distribution of data earlier in the Synapse environment. Since the acquisition of the Common Data Models company is relatively new, is it aware of the distribution of data and optimized for that?
No, so this data is going to be actually kind of sitting out in. What I see here is I see data that has been put into data lake storage as a file. So it's not at this point in a table, if you will. So in this point, what you would have is you would have a something like Data Factory that is reading data from an ERP and writing to a CDM folder, writing to either an what I would think would happen is you would be able to use one of these data models that they have. Maybe you're involved with I don't know, electricity generation. You would be able to use that data model and start mapping data into those entities. And then from there, the ability to then bring those entities into a serving layer of your choice, I think would be much easier.
Okay,
so
thanks.
Yep. I do believe that there is going to be some things that are, once you have things into a common format and kind of a common construct, Skyline is, has lots of expertise at auto-generating logic. I think this gives you new opportunities to auto-generate things that are sitting in CDM stores. Okay, so back to Synapse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into that Synapse workspace that what I was showing you, the slide that showed the Spark and the SQL and the on-demand and all that pieces. But this is what a Synapse workspace looks like. You have the ability to go out and create in Azure, define a Synapse workspace, and typically what you're going to be doing is just launching the Synapse Studio. But you can see that what's part of this Synapse Studio is I have a Spark pool. I have some Spark compute. And so let's see if I can get into the definition of what this is. You can see that I have my auto pause settings and my auto scale settings. I don't know if it's got. I think we managed the configuration of this in the workspace. But then I also have an on-demand, my SQL serverless. I have my on-demand SQL there, and then I have a data warehouse. But let's go ahead and jump into the studio. Has anybody here actually been through Studio here? There we go. So I'm launching the Synapse Studio, and I just want to go to the homepage. The Synapse Studio, it's a web-based environment where you'll have access, like any, what you're seeing on this page is I have, my quick start. So if I had been writing queries over the last couple of weeks, I would see those queries here. So if I wanted to quickly get back to some work that I was working on this morning, I would see this. It's just like a Word document or a PowerPoint document. What was the last one that I used? But I can quickly jump into what we refer to as these hubs. So we have these different hubs. We have the home hub, data, develop, orchestrate, manage, and monitor. These hubs allow you, for example, to work. If I jump into the data hub, I'm able to see the databases that are part of my workspace. The databases that I have here is I have now, to make it even more confusing, a new term here, I've got a pool and I've got an on-demand. So what my eyes see when I see the term pool, the pool is another way of saying provisioned, a provisioned SQL data warehouse. That's the full-fledged Azure SQL Data Warehouse, the provision, the DW300 that I had set under that, and this is that on-demand SQL, and then this would be that Spark compute that's available to me. Notice the quick nuances with the differences. If I expand the pool, I have tables and I have external tables, just like you would have with SQL Server that has Polybase attached to it, SQL Data Warehouse. When I go on to the on-demand, I'm only seeing the external tables. So the external tables, if I go over to my linked data now, so my, these are the data, the workspace. This is the data that's inside the workspace, if you will. The data that is linked to the workspace would be things like I might we have what's called Cosmos Link. We have the ability to link a Cosmos database and query that data from Cosmos in an analytical way here. But you're going to be most likely interested in working with the data that's in the data lake. And as I expand this data in the data lake, you'll see the different containers that's in the data lake. And I can go into a particular container and I may want to take a look at the machine. So this is a CSV file. It's sitting on the data lake store. And because of the on-demand compute, I can right click on this file and I can say, I just want to see the top 100 rows. I got to run that. And what this is using is it's using this open row set construct to query that data in the data lake. Again, it's using the on-demand compute. This, if anybody, I'm sure there's people here that have worked with Polybase. I mean, this was tremendously, it was time consuming to kind of set up and configure Polybase. This is just all built right out of the box, giving you native access into this data. I can do that same thing with Cosmos databases, and kind of query data that I have in here. And I can do that through a notebook. So with the Cosmos database, let's see, is this correct? It is. This is again now using my Spark compute with PySpark, and I should be able to. This is correct, manufacturing. Yep, I should be able to just run this. It's going to be. It's kind of a cold start up my my Spark environment, but I'm able to read that data into a data frame right here. I could jump back and forth in between, all of this in this environment. With the SQL, really with the notebooks or the SQL scripts, I have the ability to also visualize this data. I can do that directly in the environment. So as I'm trying to understand what I'm dealing with, again, trying to make it, the data engineer much more productive by, not having to shift out of, everything in a single pane of glass in the Synapse. Let me pause here. Questions? I want to make sure this is relevant to everybody here.
Hey, Chris, I think I just have a quick question about how can we, kind of get access to kick the tires on this. Synapse is kind of expensive, if you're going to go provision yourself some, Microsoft, partner funding or something like that. I don't know necessarily how that all works, but is there like credits that we can get to experiment with Synapse?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely. I'd have to look into that in terms of whether there's like an Azure credit offer that could be made to have some funds. For those that have like an MSDN account, you should have some credits that are part of that. But the first thing that comes to mind is Matt, has this team seen the OpenHack site before?
I'm sure some people have, but it's good to review it, Chris. So thanks for taking us in here.
Yeah. So these OpenHacks, I tell you, these are a real blast. They're super grueling. I'll be doing one next week, and I'm sort of dreading it because I know it's going to be super grueling. But the OpenHacks used to be in person, and these are not training events. These are events where you get assigned to a table of 5 other people, and you're asked to kind of solve the challenge. The Modern Data Warehousing Challenge is one where you would be exposed to Data Factory, Power BI, Synapse, Databricks, perhaps. You're basically given a blank check, Eric, in an Azure subscription, and you can do you can spin up whatever you need to solve the problem, and the whole goal is to be able to solve the problem. So I would encourage you to take, it's openhack.microsoft.com. There's no cost to these things. There's one coming up in September here, and it's just a click away to register. So it is a good 3-day commitment, where this is the agenda, in that you might get a half an hour of orientation and then go. And they literally open up a special website where you can log into, see what your challenge is, what the requirements are for satisfying the challenge, the credentials for your Azure subscription, and you as a team have to solve the problem. And if you have an opportunity to do this, I would highly recommend it. There's other ones. Yeah, there's other ones that I've done the modern data warehousing. I've done the AI-powered data knowledge. I had planned to do the DevOps next week, but I got skunked out of it due to scheduling timing. But there's a new open hack that I'm doing that's around Power Apps. We've got some internal training next week that we're doing. But okay. Where did my browser go? Here it is. And here it is. So, hopefully this is, really interesting from the perspective of loading data now. So when I come down to, let's see, I'm going to go back into this manufacturing data, manufacturing demo data. You know what? Actually, I'm looking for. I wanted to find something that was kind of Parquet related. Yeah. So Parquet data files, very common format for storing data in the data lake. But again, you can you have the ability to kind of query that directly here, or I have the ability to, I have two wizards here where I can quickly create an external table. So this wizard here, boy, this I had this problem the other night. I'm not sure why, but maybe that's part of the preview environment. But the wizards that are here, hopefully this will make somebody's day. When you to create these external tables, in other words, poly-based tables, it was fairly time-consuming to set up all of the delimiter types and date type, date formats and things like that. And this will give you the ability to, through basically will give you a wizard of, hey, it looks like it's going to pick this one up. Hopefully it's going to work for me. What's the file that I'm going to be loading? I'm going to go ahead and continue and say, great. What's the type of file? It's a text file. How is it delimited? If you're not familiar with it, you should be able to query it here through the preview, and I can at least see what data looks like. And I'm just, for the sake of it, going to hit continue here. I can ask it to go into a new table or an existing table, and I can do the column mappings, but come on. If I click it hard enough, it's going to open up. It should be opening up a little query window here that actually has the all of the poly-based commands that are needed to load the data into the SQL data warehouse. All right, I'm not going to wait for that. So again, for anybody that's on the call, hopefully you're nodding your head. If you've had to do that before, it's fairly arduous to do that. So this is the data hub to be able to build my queries or work with linked data. The develop hub, you can see the queries that I've been building actually are kind of being stored in my develop hub, so I can kind of come back to them. But here's some pre-built examples that we have just to demonstrate the the capability of our platform. there's 35 billion rows of data that I just queried, and here I have the ability to kind of again query off of that data with a sub select. We have the ability to kind of work with JSON data. There's an example of what some JSON data looks like, and if I'd like to, I can go ahead and query that this way. We can do dynamic data masking. We can do column level security, row level security. And I was actually referring to before. Ben, has anybody here worked with Cosmos before? To your knowledge?
Chris, no, we haven't had a major data team project.
Okay.
Most our custom dev side of the house has definitely done a few.
Well, the takeaway with the Cosmos database is a lot of times that's for real-time systems, and for doing a BI project against real-time systems, it's really challenging to kind of get the most recent data. You can certainly ingest that data into the warehouse, but getting the most recent can be really tough in a dashboard. And so we have this offering called Cosmos Link, where we are integrating the Cosmos data into Synapse. Excuse me. So you then have the ability to you have a fighting chance to show the most recent data on a dashboard, kind of enrich what you've ingested previously along with the most recently arriving data in the Cosmos. That's kind of the takeaway for that. The piece that I did not maybe do justice on is back on the data hub with the linked data out of the manufacturing table. So if you had an example where, if you had an example where this data that's sitting in a CSV file, you wanted to have that into a Power BI report, you could, and you didn't necessarily want to, load that data into a full-fledged SQL database, you can now start to bring this kind of query right to Power BI. And so, in other words, what I'm trying to say, Scott, is have a logical data warehouse. You could have a logical data warehouse where you're able to kind of query the data that's sitting out in the lake and bring that into Power BI.
Now, what I'm curious is performance and cost of that. So I'm guessing the answer to that depends on whether it's an on-demand compute or provisioned, if it's, as far as the cost goes. So if it's on demand, then you're really only paying for what it needs to spin up to process it on demand. But then performance-wise, I'm guessing you're waiting for it to, spin up a compute, and it still has to do the schema on read. So is that a viable option for something like, real-time analytics?
Yeah, maybe not for, so this is, realize this is really new to me as well, and trying to understand the different scenarios that can be applied at. But if I look at Azure Analysis Services and Power BI import, right? Those are probably decent examples where this would be, for sure could be viable. And now Azure Analysis Services, it wants to refresh. Fundamentally, it just wants a query. I don't have experience to tell you how performant it is when you might be doing, a large join or something like that. So what you would do in this scenario here is you'd create a view to form your logical partition, if you will, and then have Power BI or Azure Analysis Services kind of connect to that. From that perspective, I think it could take a lot of the cost out of building a business intelligence solution that is based on Power BI, AAS, and an underlying data layer. I'm not saying it's the great way to do it. I'm just saying it's possible. So, so in some cases you may be forced into wanting to create a logical data warehouse. You could do that here. In other cases, I still maintain that a physical data warehouse is going to be much better than a logical data warehouse any day of the week.
Yeah, but it is a question we get a lot is, which layers do we need, and can we minimize the data movement and the number of copies of data? And if you're already storing the raw in the data lake, and we already have, a good semantic model in analysis services, does that interim ETL need to be, persisted as well? And, are there certain times where it maybe isn't necessary? And I think, so far, we think many times it is reasonable, especially if we can do it in an incremental way. That can really be lighter processing. But
Right.
I think there are maybe times where we're gonna, want this as another tool in our toolbox.
Right. Yeah. And so I was just going to crack wise with you and say, well, this is why you're the consultant, is to figure out whether it makes sense. I'm representing what the platform can do, whether it makes sense or not. It's up to you, right?
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So here's another piece that I'm frankly a bit fuzzy on. I mentioned before, we have a V3 coming with Synapse. So things that are probably in private preview currently. And the on-demand SQL right now is able to deal with data in a data lake. I don't see it today being able to deal with data that's in another SQL database somewhere, an Oracle database, a Postgres database, and that's the piece that I'm trying to figure out. But that's something that kind of ask those questions and say, what's the roadmap for this, and will this on-demand SQL give me the ability, if I have data in another, it just happens to be another database at the shop, why can't I on-demand query that too, right? So that's a part that I just simply do not know the answer to as we're talking. If I had to guess, I would say that that's probably going to happen, but I don't know for a fact. Let's move away from the data a bit and get into the further into the development hub. So in the development hub, my SQL scripts are all here. My data flows. So these are your Power BI data flows that you might be building, and I'll just pick this one, I guess, at random. And so, of course, you guys, I'm sharing with you a demo environment that Microsoft's put together for employees to showcase this. But this is an example of a data flow. This is, it's not really referred to as Data Factory inside here, but this is Data Factory, as you can see. This is Data Factory. The pieces that you build in Data Factory is, can be brought into this environment. And then also sitting here is notebooks. So the notebooks that for the individuals that will be doing data science work, or wanting to use Spark for whatever reason, they have those notebooks here. And if you haven't seen notebooks before, you wind up having these little cells where I can run the entire thing against, with the language of my choice. I can specify the language for the entire notebook, or at the cell level, I can kind of switch back and forth between languages in different cells. And then I wind up using my Spark cluster to run this workload. But just like what I was showing you with SQL, is you can visualize this data here as well, and you can run them cell by cell. And what's nice is that it does, this environment is new. This is what I showed the other day, but my demo environment expired and I had to regenerate it for today. So this is an example of me just coming fresh, brand new into my environment, and it's caching the results from yesterday's work, and I can see where I left off. So I have all the ability to leverage Azure Machine Learning here, or do anything that I could do approach with for example, Python. I showed you the data flows. Probably haven't spent enough time on that, but another piece that we have is Power BI. So we have Power BI is built into this environment as well. And I had trouble with this the other night, kind of getting this to show. See if it's linked. Go to my home here. Where is it? You have the ability to link your Power BI environment into a Power BI workspace into this environment. And if I can get this to cooperate with me, what you will see is you'd have another grouping, Power BI, and you would then literally see Power BI, the web edit, where you're able to start building Power BI reports off of the data models that you've built, either in your Spark SQL or in the data warehouse. So not sure what's going on here. Well, I'm going to come back to that and see if I can kind of reset this example. We have the orchestrate environment, and this again let's us put this helps us be able to kind of create the pipeline. So this is the environment. I think is Nicole. I want to say that this is the piece that allows us to that's in GA, or I'm sorry, in preview now, whereas the code-free development of the data flows, which I was showing you before, allowing us to do the data wrangling and those kinds of pieces, was in the Develop Hub. The monitor, this place allows us to, just like in Azure Data Factory, I can see all of the runs that I have, things that I have either triggered or things that are in pipelines. And I'm able to see, all of those runs. And then in the manage area, this is where I'm able to, if I'm done for the day and I would really like to, pause my SQL data warehouse, I can do that. It'll come up. You can see it's actually available right here. Or in my Apache Spark pools, I'm able to see what size that environment is. And I can then get into this environment and see where the you can see at the auto, how it's set up for auto pause, and as it idles, it will kind of retire the nodes in the cluster. I've shown a lot quickly. What did I gloss over that you'd like to come back for me to see? And while I'm just pausing here, I want to see if I can get into the Power BI.
Chris, I guess changes as far as the core engine itself. So, I know that ultimately is Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and in future versions, there'd be additional enhancements. So I really like kind of how Synapse brings everything together, that single pane of glass that you talk about. But, one of the barriers, I mean, we've had some cases where we've explored it, but the reality is Azure SQL Data Warehouse hasn't been a part of many of our solutions. And I think the two challenges there were, one was cost, even though I think that could be debatable, right? If we pause it, scale it appropriately, et cetera. And the other has been configuration and kind of the needing to think about things differently, like ELT versus ETL, how we're doing round robin. Do we have it successfully set up to manage the indexes where we're actually going to take advantage of that massively parallel processing? Are there any changes there that make Synapse more of a kind of like Azure SQL database, just start sticking large amounts of data in and you just benefit right off the bat with MPP?
Yeah, I want to say that that's partly answered through some of the caching and things like that that exist, but I don't know that I have those slides here, Scott. One of the pieces that we are okay. So one of the things that we're anticipating. One of the things that's been a challenge with Synapse is the scaling. Scaling works great. You can scale it up and you can scale it down. The problem is it's an offline operation. So when you in the middle of the day, if you need to add more power, it is we're going to need to kick the users off in order to kind of scale it up, and vice versa if we want to scale it down. So it would not be uncommon for I've seen organizations that have built PowerShell commands to at the end of the day pause the data warehouse to make sure that it's not left on, because you're right, it is. I mean, if we put it into context, if you are running, multiple VMs and things like that, there's significant cost to it. So this is a much more capable environment. What we will be seeing in some of the pain points that we have today in terms of being able to auto scale online, I know are being addressed. Nicole, did you happen to send that article around that I sent to you earlier today on kind of the technical article on Polaris?
I did, but I'm not sure that everybody's had a chance to read it. I think it's out there on our team site.
Okay, it's a deep read. Charles Feddersen has been, what I've been desperately trying to find approval to do is to talk more about V3. And I think if you look at the article that is out, it's a deep read, and then compare what that Synapse does today versus what's in the article. You'll start to get a sense of what this product's truly capable of doing. But so Scott, yeah, I don't know that the cost. The cost can be probably dealt with through reserve capacity. With customers kind of, as customers kind of commit to that environment. Do you know what reserve capacity is, Scott? Do you know how that works?
So you either sign up for 1 year or 3 year in most cases, and ultimately will override the MSRP pricing with a significantly discounted pricing.
Right. Yep. So there's more economical ways to, if they are going to be banking on these workloads and they really have to have these, there's smarter ways to buy it. So if they can look ahead and say, for the next year, for sure we're going to be running this, then they really would want get that Groupon, right? But if it's something that's going to be much longer, 3 years or more, then the savings can be even greater. But I do think that our ability to kind of scale, if we can solve the problem of being able to do the online scaling, we'll be able to more adequately deal with, help customers manage the costs and be able to kind of scale without interrupting users, either up or down.
Now the on-demand compute to some extent would do that, but right now, just so I understand its limitations, right now that only applies to, say, data lake type sources, and there would be time for kind of like a cold startup. Are both of those true? Am I thinking about it right?
Yeah, I mean, what I was showing you before, I hadn't really warmed up the environment, so all of that was fairly realistic. Is there some cold startup? Probably, in terms of kind of, in order to build any kind of cache, right? There's going to be, but I mean, these are some of the scenarios that we're talking about for, serverless, being able to explore the data, build the logical data warehouses, or even do data transforms. And what this could look like is, this kind of an example where it's, using Synapse on demand, to pull data and push it to either another data store or into, something like Power BI. Here's another example. Yep. So I kind of click and build that out. Trying to see what else I have here. Yeah,
it's unrelated, Chris, but I was interested in the similar technology on the Azure SQL database side and managed instance. I think they both offer, since they're both platform as a service, that they both offer, I forget what they call it now, let's say the equivalent of on-demand compute, right, versus provisioned.
The managed instance.
Yeah, but it's and here I'll get the name in a moment, but you can choose whether now you want it provisioned, or there is now the option of the compute tier can be serverless. And my understanding of that serverless is that you can basically, you put in your min vcores, your max vcores. You can decide whether you want it to reach inactive after a certain timeout period. And, you know, it can kind of do that automatic scaling for you versus saying you have to write your own scripts to do it.
Well, we do have, I'm just trying to determine if this is what you're interested in, the SQL Server serverless in the Azure SQL database family.
Yep.
Yeah, I honestly don't have that much experience with this, but you can see that, you know, the example is it's optimized for these single databases with, you know, intermittent, unpredictable, or small usage scenarios. I don't know that they really kind of talk about. I was always thinking that this would be, you know, a great, if I operated a you know, kind of a boutique website or something like that that had occasionally, it wasn't, you know, wasn't the most heavily hit database or, you know, website as an example, that this might be a good solution for that.
Yeah, and that probably makes more sense than, say, ETL, where it's kind of a set window so we can script, say, the scale up and scale down. But I was curious if, you know, as we get into more data ingestion scenarios, if we might have more of kind of like on-demand ETL, and then, you know, you could say scale up to, say, 20 cores if you need to, but then when you're done, basically shut it down.
Yeah, so to be perfectly candid with you, outside of Synapse, I haven't had that much experience with the serverless compute. The the big enterprise customers that I typically have been working with haven't had as much interest in that, but I think there's all kinds of, you know, different customers that this would be very appealing for. I see what you're saying. I think it could be, you know, perhaps, you know, really appealing for, again, that scenario where maybe I'm just trying to, I need some compute to be able to, you know, provision data into a, you know, move it along down to something like Azure Analysis Services.
Yeah, basically always trying to move closer to that consumption-based pricing versus, you know, not everyone is a huge fan of, you know, whether it's PowerShell or something else to, you know, always make sure we're, you know, custom building those services to kind of scale it up, run it, scale it down.
Right. Right.
And
Yep.
if we do that explicitly, it's still not being smart about did it need it. So I wasn't sure if this had some built-in smarts. It seemed like it did. You know, you tell it the range of cores, it'll figure out what it needs. I didn't put it to the test to see how good it is, but, you know, that would be the other advantage is the scripts I've written aren't that smart.
Yeah, and that's these are some of the capabilities that customers have been definitely asking for is the auto scale. You know, our I want to say the way we're going to work is that we're going to, well, we do offer auto scale, for example, in some versions of HD Insight, some versions of Cosmos, here with the serverless here as well, Databricks, and generally speaking, we won't automatically, we're not going to automatically increase your bill unless you've given us really approval to do that, right? So this would be something the customer would have to opt into, specify what they are looking for in terms of you know, how far something could scale up. But you know, generally speaking, the system is going to require some guidance about how you want it to scale, and that is the piece that we're really looking forward to being you know, fully resolved in SQL Data Warehouse, is the ability to do that without it interrupting workloads that are ongoing. Make sense?
Yep, thank you.
I can see that I've got a customer trying to reach me. If there's I don't want to keep. I'm happy to continue talking, but if there isn't anything further, we can just conclude. And, you know, you guys know how to reach me if there's something that I've piqued your interest and you have some further things you want to discuss. You know, please ping me.
Yeah, Chris, definitely, you know, want to thank you for taking a good chunk of time out of your afternoon to share all this information with us. This is awesome. and definitely want to give you the opportunity to get to the customer. Everybody on this call knows how that goes. So
Yeah,